Myth versus reality. Asterix. They tell tourists that Venice has always smelled like romance. Salt air, wet stone, a hint of espresso. The brochures don't mention the centuries of rot trapped under every green slick plank, the perfume of dog musk, candle smoke, and failed plumbing wafting up through the floorboards. In 1520, no one called it romance. They called it Tuesday. If love had a scent here, it was mildew trying to pass for civility. Venice hid its decay behind gold-leafed icons, much the same way a corpse might hide behind a painted fan. You are 21, possibly 22. Birthdays blur when the plague keeps rearranging the guests. You spend your nights hunched over a bench in a bookbinding workshop between a pawn shop and a shuttered apothecary. Outside the narrow alley, the lagoon breathes like something alive, heavy, slow, and slightly annoyed at still existing. Rain hisses against tiled roofs, sliding down gargoyles' chipped mouths before dripping onto the cobblestones that haven't been properly cared for since the Doge's seventh mistress decided walking was for peasants. Inside, the wax candle burns low, its wick making small, choking noises that feel strangely appropriate. The light it casts doesn't illuminate so much as confess to a crime. This is the kind of night where the shadows have weight. The damp in your sleeves, the tap-tap of water on the coloured glass, the glug of canal water just outside the door, all of it presses inward. The city folds around the workshop like a damp cloak around a dying flame. Somewhere, a gondolier coughs a song into the dark, but the sound quickly drowns in rain. You wonder if he's singing to a lover or just trying to prove he's still afloat. Either way, it sounds like a confession. Your master, Signor Belisario, has been asleep for hours, snoring like a warped bellows. The old man is more glue than flesh now, his fingertips permanently slick with paste, his lungs coated with gold dust. In the day, he moves in gentle half-circles around the workbench, muttering Latin prayers to keep the devil out of the bindings. At night, those same mutters slip into dreams, echoing through the rafters like the city's own restless conscience. He'll die eventually, probably at the table, mid-sentence, mid-glue stroke, and his apprentices will go on binding new Bibles over the old ones, because it's cheaper to reuse faith than import it anew. You glance up at the small round window near the ceiling. The rain distorts the coloured panes into trembling mosaics. Saints with melting halos, angels stretching into puddles. The light that seeps through turns everything the shade of old honey. Books rest everywhere, half-finished folios, ledgers, forgotten ledgers of forgotten ledgers. The beeswax smell sticks to your skin, sweet at first, then cloying, then nauseating. You scrape a thread of dried glue from the tabletop and roll it between your fingers. It feels like second-hand sin. You weren't born to this craft. Few are. In another life, maybe you'd have been copying texts at the university, quoting Aristotle so pompously the professors would forget to dock your pay. Instead, you took refuge here after a failed apprenticeship with a mapmaker who preferred drinking to drawing. It turns out in Venice, there's more money in fixing the covers of holy books than correcting the lies in nautical charts. People want their devotions neat and leather-bound, even when the world around them is mostly water and hypocrisy. You lean closer to the manuscript in front of you, some patron's commission, a devotional that's supposed to shimmer with divine authority. The only thing divine about it is that it hasn't fallen apart yet. The parchment is as greasy as a dockworker's handshake. The paint on the illuminations was mixed with cheap vinegar instead of egg white. You sigh, brush a smear of ochre from the depiction of a saint's robe, and watch the figure's face disappear into a pale smear. That's theology for you. One careless breath, and the eternal salvation melts off the page. Outside, thunder rolls lazily over the lagoon. More complaint than threat. Venice doesn't get proper storms, only slow tantrums that last for days. Somewhere, church bells tumble into the noise, out of sync and out of patience. You imagine every bell tower rocking slightly under the strain, their guardians asleep or drunk or both. What's one more crooked tone in a city built entirely on imbalance? A movement catches your eye. A rat, sleek and confident, scampering across the rafters. It pauses, sniffing the candle air, then continues on its expedition. The rats here are philosophers. They know things. They've seen the council in session, the courtesans powdering away despair, the carpenters reinforcing a palace that keeps sinking like an aging courtesan's posture. There's something admirable about their persistence. You wish your fellow humans worked with the same clarity of purpose. You dip the brush again, binding another piece of thread to the spine. The glue has cooled. It stiffens like congealed blood. The smell makes your eyes smart. You hum to yourself. Nothing melodic, just a way to remind your brain you're still on speaking terms with your body. Behind you, the rain thickens. It comes in fits as if the sky is clearing its throat. Every droplet falls with purpose, pattering against the coloured glass in patterns that suggest messages you'll never decode. Maybe the Virgin herself is trying to scold the city. But Venice gave up listening centuries ago. The candlelight shivers. You glance over the shoulder to the shadowy corner where the tools hang. Awls, clamps, knives. Craft, yes, but also quiet destruction. Nothing beautiful emerges without a little breaking first. Your bench neighbour, Giovanna, shifts in her sleep across the room, curled in her shawl near the dying coals. She murmurs something that might be a prayer, or might just be her stomach complaining. Her hair, soaked from earlier errands, lies around her like an ink spill. You watch her breathe, slow and steady, weirdly serene despite the flea bites that mark every inch of her bare wrists. You'd ask what she dreams about, if dreams even survive in air this damp. Venice was rich once. Everyone knows that line. It's the historical equivalent of he had potential. Now the city staggers between greatness and a hangover. The arsenal docks still pound with hammers. Galleys still slide out glittering under torchlight. But most of the merchandise heading east is rumour. And what returns is plague. You've seen the officials tally bodies as briskly as they tally taxes. It's an efficient kind of grief. That's the myth. Venice as queen of the waters, the city of marble and music. Reality? She's an old courtesan counting coins by candlelight, her jewels pawned, her breath shallow but still convinced she can charm God himself into another dance. And here you are, one of the anonymous hands keeping up appearances, binding her missals and mending her relics, stitching her doubts in calfskin. On the work table lies a small brass stamp, the kind used to emboss titles. You press a fingertip to its cold surface. The letters spell out Gloria Dio. Maybe irony was invented for nights like this. You hear a creak at the door, the wet click of warped wood yielding. You freeze. The master sleeps on, undisturbed, his snores fluttering like defective bellows. A breeze snakes in, bringing a rank scent of canal water and burnt pitch. Someone must be passing in the alley. Nobody walks here by accident. This is the kind of street even a thief crosses himself before entering. A ghost? More likely a drunk. The ghosts here are better company than the living. You stand, brush the glue crumbs from your tunic, and peek through the glass panel set in the door. The candlelight reflects your own haggard face first. Hollow eyes, streak of adhesive on your chin, like some priestly ointment gone wrong. Outside, the narrow passage glimmers with accumulated rain. The lamplight from a distant corner blurs through the downpour, and there, movement, a shadow taller than the doorframe, shifting, uncertain. For a second you think you've imagined it, but then a shape detaches from the dark and moves toward the workshop. A fist raps against the wood, polite, hesitant, the way debt collectors knock before deciding to stop being polite. You hesitate. The master forbade opening the door at night, after the time a mad friar tried to sell him a relic straight from Golgotha that turned out to be a boiled chicken bone. But this knock carries an odd rhythm, almost familiar. 3 slow taps, pause, then 2 quick ones. You've heard that rhythm before, though not in any prayer book. You glance at Belisario, still asleep, mouth open, snoring into his own beard. Typical. If the Doge himself showed up bleeding gold, The old man would roll over and dream of discounts on vellum. So it's up to you. Of course it is. The door opens with a groan, as if it disapproves. Rain immediately breathes in, curling around your ankles. Cold, metallic, tasting faintly of fish and sin. Outside stands a man wrapped in a heavy cloak, hat brim dripping. His face is half in shadow, but the candlelight catches enough. Pale skin, with the faint shine of someone used to indoor crimes, not outdoor labour. "You are still working late," he says in Italian that sounds educated but tired. His voice is soft, as though every word costs him something. You don't answer right away. Suspicion has its own etiquette here. Finally, you nod toward the bench. "Deadlines," you say. The saints are impatient. He gives a small smile that doesn't reach his eyes. A good Catholic sentiment. "May I?" He steps inside before you can answer. The smell that follows him is not rain. Something sharper, like ink mixed with vinegar. It clings to the air. You close the door quickly, shutting out the whispering rain. The stranger removes his hat. His hair is dark and clipped short, revealing the kind of forehead that collects confidences. His clothes, though damp, are of fine cut. Not nobility, but sponsorship-level respectability. He surveys the workshop, the bindings, the scattered tools, with the same expression he might use to inspect an enemy's walls. Then he produces from his cloak a parcel wrapped in waxed cloth and lays it carefully on the table. "I have something that requires discretion," he says. "There's that word everyone loves right before things go wrong." You glance at the bundle. The cloth already tells you too much. The heavy, uneven shape of a book, yes, but larger than most you handle, and bound tight as a secret. He unwraps it enough for you to see a corner of dark leather, embossed with faded letters in some foreign script. Greek, maybe, or something pretending to be Greek. "I was told Signor Belisario takes private commissions," the man says, "for texts not meant for public view." You stifle a sigh. He sleeps like the righteous. I do the work. He nods. Good. Then we can speak freely. Not an encouraging choice of words. You pour him a cup of the workshop's usual offering, thin wine that tastes like it changed religions mid-fermentation. He doesn't drink it, just holds it, staring into the surface as though expecting revelation. Outside, thunder grumbles again. The glass panes tremble. The candle flickers. The old man on the cot stirs in his sleep, muttering about margins and saints. The stranger waits until the snores resume before leaning closer. "This book," he whispers, "is dangerous to possess, but more dangerous to destroy. I need it rebound, new cover, fresh gilding." Invisible to the inquisitors, you resist the urge to laugh. Half the city hides something from the Inquisition. Usually it's a mistress or unpaid debt. Sometimes it's a manuscript. You've seen stranger things passed off as pious reading, but there's a tone in his voice, strained reverence mixed with dread, that unsettles you. You brush your fingers lightly across the exposed edge of the book. The leather is colder than it should be, even in this damp. For a moment you imagine a pulse beneath the surface, just faint enough to doubt your sanity. "What's in it?" you ask. He hesitates, as though the air itself might testify against him. A map, or the idea of a map. The mind of a map, perhaps. Its details are not for, he searches for the right euphemism, unordained eyes. You pull your hand back. Venice has invented 1,000 versions of blasphemy, but that phrasing suggests this one glows in the dark, and you want it disguised as a hymnal. A Latin psalter would do. You let out a slow breath. That's a lot of Ave Marias for one secret. Name your price. You think about it. Your master's debts are enough to drown an elephant. The workshop owes 3 months' rent. The landlord's patience erodes faster than the plaster on his own balcony. You've pawned so many tools that half your craft now relies on borrowed gratitude. This commission could buy a week's worth of sleep. But then again, books with warnings attached have a way of shortening people's life expectancies. Curiosity might be a virtue in scholars, but in craftsmen it's just a liability, with better vocabulary. Still, you're already intrigued. You can feel the city's wet breath pressing against the window behind you. Listening, savouring your hesitation. "Leave it," you say finally. "Come back in 3 nights." He nods. No record of the binding. No mention of my visit. Of course. Secrecy here is as common as rats, and twice as necessary. He pulls up his hood again, setting the untouched wine aside. "There are those who would kill to claim what's inside," he says as he nears the door. "Pray you're not one of them." The words hang longer than the candle smoke after he's gone. You bolt the door carefully, though the lock is more decorative suggestion than functional barrier. Then you unwrap the bundle fully, curiosity already gnawing through caution. The book stares back at you. Stained leather, edges dark as ink, faint traces of lettering half burned away. Something about the proportion seems wrong. Too wide for a Bible, too narrow for a ledger. You flip it open. Inside, the script swims before your eyes, delicate black lines marching across the page, interlaced with diagrams that look like celestial charts folded on themselves. The paper, or parchment, seems to shift imperceptibly under your touch, like thin skin over muscle. A whisper of glue drips onto your knuckle. It feels oddly warm, almost alive. You wipe it off, but the sensation lingers, tingling, as if the book has registered you. A noise behind you, the soft cough of someone waking. You close the covers quickly. The master grunts, turns on his cot, and mumbles, "Get me the red leather for the Doge's commission tomorrow." Then he snores again. You let out a breath you hadn't noticed holding. Outside, the rain seems lighter now, more deliberate, like fingers tapping out a code on the glass. That's how it begins, not with divine visions or trumpeted doom, but with water, wax, and the smell of old leather. Venice prefers its omens subtle. The flicker of candlelight plays along the book's gilded edges, turning them briefly into tiny mirrors. In one reflection, for a split second, you think you see something move. A shape within the gold, shifting like a creature turning in its sleep. You blink, and it's gone. Just candlelight and exhaustion conspiring again. You close the workshop shutters, muttering a curse about drafts. The boards creak as if whispering back. The city outside has gone nearly silent now, only the occasional lap of the canal below. You sit back at the table, staring at the strange volume. Your hand itches to open it again, but you don't, not yet. In Venice, patience is the one virtue that pays in survival rather than sainthood. The night deepens. The candles melt into stubs of uncertain flame. You work mechanically on another mundane commission, rebinding a prayer book whose owner believes God prefers crimson leather to brown. The glue sets sluggishly in the damp, forming tiny veins that look disturbingly like the ones on the back of your hand. At some point, the bells of San Moise tolled midnight, sluggish and damp. Each strike sends a ripple through the air, echoing off the canal like a reminder that time still insists on passing, even here. You glance again at the forbidden volume. Its presence nags at the edge of your awareness, a pressure in the room's air. You could move it to the storage chest, but that feels like giving it too much recognition, as if hiding it implies belief in its danger. So you leave it on the table, where you can watch it not doing anything suspicious. That's the trick with cursed objects. They wait for you to prove you believe. Your eyelids grow heavy. The candle's shadow stretches longer, softer. The rain resumes its steady, measured whisper against the glass. Each droplet spreads a small pulse of trembling colour through the stained panes, smearing saints once more into abstraction. Venice dreams in rain, slow, repetitive, drowning its own memories. You wake, or half-wake, to silence. The candle has burned out, leaving only a faint glow from the coals in the hearth. The air has turned thick. It tastes metallic, as though the workshop itself were rusting from within. You hear something, a paper rustle, low and deliberate. You sit up. On the table, the strange book lies open, though you know you left it closed. The pages flutter slightly, though there's no breeze. For a heartbeat, you think you see movement within the ink lines, curves shifting, letters rearranging themselves, like fish changing direction. You blink again, and the illusion stops. Just shadows. Just fatigue. Probably. You tell yourself you're hallucinating, a reasonable evening pastime for a craftsman living on fumes and cheap wine. Venice breeds hallucinations the way other cities breed pigeons. Still, you close the book gently this time, slide it under a stack of blank covers, and whisper a profanity just to reset the balance of sacred and obscene. Sleep doesn't come easily after that. You sit by the window instead, listening to the city breathe beneath the rain. Somewhere, a gondola knocks against a piling, a hollow echo that sounds almost like your own heartbeat. Across the narrow canal, a light flickers briefly in an upper window, then extinguishes. The smell of soggy plaster seeps through the cracks. Water drips down in slow rhythm. A pulse that reminds you how Venice always leaks, even time. You think of the myth again. The floating city. Serene, beautiful, eternal. What a joke. It floats the way old corpses float, precariously, reluctantly, buoyed by gases best left undescribed. And yet, tomorrow people will still step into churches, bow before altars, place their small hopes in gilded reliquaries, and pretend the mould doesn't exist. Maybe that's what civilization really is, mutual agreement to ignore the smell. You rest your forehead against the cool glass and watch dawn tease the horizon, grey filtered through the leftover night. The rain hasn't stopped. It's simply grown bored, drizzling lazily now. You see your reflection faintly in the pane, blurred, weary, the corners of your mouth upturned in something that could be amusement or despair depending on the lighting. Behind you, Belisario wakes, yawns, scratches his head, and calls for breakfast as if the night had been perfectly ordinary. You turn from the window, the image of the forbidden book still lodged somewhere behind your eyes. Myth or reality? By now you can't tell the difference. But you have work to do, and Venice demands its illusions restored before morning properly begins. And as you reach for the first strip of binding leather, the coals in the grate crackle softly. A hiss, a sigh, or maybe just the city reminding you very gently that nothing here stays still for long. Reality. They tell you the Renaissance was born in marble palaces, that every painter wore silk, and every printer drank pure genius for breakfast. The truth smells more like wet leather and disappointed bees. You'd be amazed how quickly the candle's romance fades when the wax sputters onto your sleeve and burns straight through to your forearm. One more blister in a city addicted to moulds. Economic, fungal, and moral. You are in Venice, 1520. The rain has been falling for 3 days, turning alleys into dreams of drowning. The gondoliers have retreated beneath their tarps, muttering prayers that sound suspiciously like invoices. Inside the binding workshop, the air is solid with glue fumes and spoiled hopes. The master has gone home to his brood, 5 children and 2 creditors, and left you to mind the place. That would be fine, except that earlier tonight a soaked merchant, who smelled of bay leaves, stumbled in, dropped off a wrapped parcel, and said, "For the client," who pays in silence, then left. You shouldn't have unwrapped it, but you did. The night had been perfectly ordinary. You turn from the window, the image of the forbidden book still lodged somewhere behind your eyes. Myth or reality, you can't tell the difference. But you have work to do, and Venice demands its illusions restored before morning properly begins. And as you reach for the first strip of binding leather, the coals in the grate crackle softly. A hiss, a sigh, or maybe just the city reminding you, very gently, that nothing here stays still for long. The parcel lies on the table. The wrappings cling to it like damp skin. You peel back the first layer and catch the stench of old salt and oil. The cover underneath isn't leather at all, but fish skin, scaled and half-transparent. From a distance, it might pass as fine calf, the kind nobles like to lick with their eyes before pretending to read. But up close, it's too real, too much like the living stuff Venice herself is made from. Something dragged out of the sea, painted over, and told to behave. You tell yourself it must be a curiosity from the Levant, some wealthy fool's product of an overfunded imagination. Yet when you lay your finger along the spine, the edge ripples under your touch, as though something behind it turned over in sleep. There are practical things to do. The glue pot is lukewarm. You stir it, pretending not to see the lazy circle tighten around your reflection. A page slips free of the wrapping. The script is dense, the ink brown as dried blood. Lines curl like worms feeding on meaning. The Latin is correct, but wrong. A grammar that shifts as you read. It whispers familiarity in all the wrong places. You glance around the room, at the presses, the scraps of gold leaf, the clutter of worn tools, everything ordinary enough to dictate sanity, yet the pages spread themselves wider, like damp laundry defying the weather. You think of the church decree passed last year, printed matter to be submitted for inspection, lest heresy find purchase among the gullible. You suppose gullibility could describe you, an apprentice, not yet licensed, earning barely enough to afford bread thickened with rainwater. You're precisely the sort of person who'd believe paper can whisper. You dip your quill, because habit dies slower than faith. There's accounting to be done. Incoming client, unknown manuscript, work begun at the second hour after compline, weather appalling. You always note the weather. It feels polite to acknowledge the city's mood. You nearly add, book may be breathing, but the tip of the quill hesitates. That kind of joke doesn't age well under inquisitors. A draught sneaks through the window lattice. The candle shivers, its flame wavering as if unsure which side of reality to illuminate. You adjust the wick and glance outside. The canal gleams like a length of black satin pulled tight, its surface pocked by rain. Across the way, another workshop's shutters slam. Memories of voices drift through the drizzle. A snatch of argument in dialect. Maybe lovers quarrelling. Maybe merchants counting losses. Same thing, really. The book waits. You turn back, and for an instant, the air smells of brine again. You could swear you hear pages, shifting even though you haven't touched them. Right, you mutter to yourself, because conversation is cheaper than company. Let's pretend this is normal. You warm the glue until its skin melts, then take a strip of dyed leather. The deep oxblood colour Venetians say resembles devotion or taxation, depending on the season. The binding knife, its handle worn smooth by years of use, feels comfortingly mundane. Tool meets material, hand meets muscle memory, and for a little while your pulse steadies. Then you notice the watermark, pressed faintly into each page, visible only under the candle's edge light, a sigil like an inverted trident. Not the usual papermaker's mark, more like, what? A coat of arms turned inside out. The very shape throbs slightly, the way eyes do when you stare too long into darkness. You sit back. Maybe the merchant was smuggling something, some illicit philosophy or coded letter to Rome. One rumour this month claims the Pope's agents pay handsomely for certain manuscripts. Another claims they burn buyers at the stake as a warning. Either way, the profit margin is thin. You find yourself speaking to no one in particular. How profitable is madness these days? The only reply is the wax dripping from each bent wick, slow and deliberate, like punctuation. Outside the rain intensifies, the gutters gurgle. In the distance, a church bell stutters on the hour. It might be 2 a.m, or 5, or forever. You can't keep track of time here. The city itself runs on tides, dreams and overdue balances. You lean over the manuscript again, meaning to finish the inspection. But your eyes snag on one word repeated halfway down the page. It translates roughly to remember. Each time your gaze lands on it, the room seems to draw narrower, the candlelight sharpened into blades. You blink, look away, and the word changes form. Now it means return, or forgive. The grammar folds like wet linen. You think of your mother in Padua, real enough, stern enough, and the way she used to scold you for wasting candles. Light is expensive, she'd said. Use the dark, you'll see more. You almost laugh. You're certainly using it now. In one corner sits a stack of rejected commissions, a trio of devotional tractates, a saint's life, a merchant's will, an unfinished romance about a nun who talks to birds, all equally unmarketable. You suspect none of them ever heard an honest prayer. You envy them for their silence. The manuscript, the notebook, you correct yourself, perfumes the air with salt and rot. You take another look, because naturally you would, and discover that one paragraph depicts, with impeccable miniature illustrations, a scene you recognize. This room, this exact table, tonight's puddle of candlelight pooling on the floorboards. Even the curve of the knife you set down. Only in the drawing, there is someone standing behind you. You turn. No one. Just the reflection on the window glass. Your own face, elongated, pale as paper. For a moment the features seem to double, and the second face smiles in ways your mouth hasn't learned. Then a droplet smears the image, splits it, drags it into nonsense. Excellent, you whisper. Rain doing the city's spiritual labour again. You return to work because not working feels worse. Page by page you check for tears, for signs of worm or mildew. Instead you find sketches, maps of coastlines that don't exist, cities shaped like eyes, rivers reversing their own flow. Between two pages, pressed flat, is a thin scale, silvered, sharp-edged, like the sliver of a coin hammered too thin. When you run your thumb along it, the metal sings faintly. It occurs to you then that you might be asleep. Perhaps you nodded off waiting for the master, and this is just your conscience staging cheap dramas in the glue fog. The theory comforts you until a drop of melted wax lands on your other hand, raising a welt that smells unmistakably real. You curse quietly in 3 languages, all vulgar, none accurate, and suck the burn. The taste is mineral, like old coins. To distract yourself, you imagine tomorrow delivering the finished book to some hooded patron, collecting a handful of silver, pretending you don't see the ink stains on your fingers. Maybe you'll buy decent bread. Maybe that painter friend will finally pay you for the covers you did for his sketchbook. 20 pages of anatomically confused angels, valued only by the degree of their embarrassment. But even those comforting lies feel thin tonight. Venice seems to conspire with that book to remind you what's built on mud will always sink eventually, even if it learns to charge tourists first. A clap of thunder rolls across the lagoon, deep enough to rattle the pothooks. The glow from the hearth reddens, dimmed by gusts from the chimney draught. The coals whisper in some language older than your profession. You decide to fetch more fuel. The firewood lies stacked by the back door, the logs swollen with damp. As you lift one, something scuttles beneath. Too quick for rat, too solid for roach. You don't investigate. You close the door firmly, wedge the bolt, and tell yourself it was just Venice rearranging itself again. When you return, the manuscript is ajar. You didn't leave it like that. The pages curve outward, as if breathing in your absence. It must be the heat. Humidity plays tricks with paper fibers. You know this. You repeat it while securing the boards with a cloth weight. But even weighted, the corners twitch against restraint. That's enough, you say aloud, to which the night says nothing, which somehow feels like agreement. You clean your tools carefully, but halfway through, an impulse crawls up your spine. Look. You shouldn't, obviously. Curiosity is the path that led half of Venice into the debtor's prisons of philosophy. Yet you find yourself slipping one finger under the cover. The page beneath glimmers in a light not belonging to your candles, a faint pelagic gleam as though each letter were written in crushed pearls. Lines coalesce into images. Faces, ships, a city of towers set upon the sea, not Venice, but resembling her in the way bones resemble the bodies they once held up. You trace one tower's face, the ink ripples. A drop of water lands on the parchment. Except there's no leak above, no open window now. The droplet spreads, sinking in but leaving behind faint luminescence. You decide that's enough scholarship for one night, and shut the cover firmly. Glue hardens fastest when there's resolve. You staple your conscience to that fact. There's still leather to cut and end papers to fix. Work is the easiest spell for banishing thought, until the corner of the finished cover curls of its own accord, revealing that same sigil pressed into the spine. 3-pronged, inverted, pulsing faintly. Great. The forgers used living material now. What next? Books confessing your sins for you. A knock jolts you upright. You merely topple the glue pot. 3 raps, polite, evenly spaced. Too methodical for drunkards, too restrained for police. You wait, heart climbing into your throat. The knock repeats, softer this time. You open the door, only a crack. Outside, a figure in a long oilcloth cape, hood drawn low. Their voice is female but strained, as though dragged through salt water. Delivery received. You nod, because language seems treacherous. Good, she says, handing you a second parchment, sealed with dark wax. Instructions. Do not attempt translation. Then she vanishes back into the rain, footsteps absorbed by water's applause. You stare at the seal. It bears the same inverted trident. You think about throwing it into the fire, but curiosity has already built a second spine inside you. The seal cracks open like brittle bone. Inside, a short note written in a hand that mimics yours so precisely it's embarrassing. It reads, "Bind the pages before dawn. Reflection is payment." What does that even mean? You're still pondering when the window suddenly clears from condensation, revealing your own reflection again. Only the reflection moves a heartbeat late, as though deciding whether to agree with your choices. You tell it, firmly, "Go away." It mouths something back. The candle sputters violently, throwing the workshop into brief, lurid strobe. For a moment, both figures, you and the reflection, seem doubled across every surface. The walls, the tools, even the shining edge of the binding knife. Then the light steadies, leaving only you, flushed and absurd, talking to glass. You pace once around the table to ground yourself, counting steps. 1 to the wall of trimmed vellum, 2 to the drying racks, 3 to the coffer of pigments. Counting has always helped. Numbers don't judge, they just add debt. Behind you, something sighs. Not the fire, this breath carries consonants. You whip around, blade still in hand. Nothing, except that the manuscript lies open again on the bench, as if to yawn in your face. You think of calling for help, but the alleys outside swallow sound like payments overdue. The nearest neighbour is a cooper too drunk to remember his own barrel sizes. You're alone here, just you, the book, and however many gods still bother auditing this quarter of the lagoon. There's an old superstition among binders that certain inks retain the soul of the scribe. Superstition, of course, being medieval code for trade secret nobody likes to admit works. Maybe that's what you're dealing with. A particularly talkative soul. You could charge extra for that. Interactive edition. The thought steadies you enough to sit down again. You'll bind it, following the order on the note. By dawn, you tell yourself, it will just be an ordinary volume with unusual preservatives. Venice will have one more secret, and you'll have one less reason to sleep. You thread the first cord, tighten the stitching. The pages shift with each pull, giving them to your grip, like soft flesh. You mutter curses at your craft, the only prayers that reliably produce results. By the time you finish the first signature, the outer light dawns slightly greyer beyond the glass. Or maybe that's only thicker rain. Halfway through the second signature, you notice the ink threading into the seams, staining the new leather from within. Veins of white sheen spread outward, pulse faintly, fade. The book feels warmer every minute. You could swear it listens when you breathe. You stop counting stitches. Your palms sweat despite the chill. The smell, salt, metal, faint sweetness like dying flowers, begins to fill the room. The longer you work, the more it mingles with the glue's pungency, until you can't tell which is which. Perhaps the city mixes all smells into that same collective confession, rot aspiring to perfume. Another hour passes, or maybe a century. The candle stumps collapse in their sockets. You replace them absently, one after another, until the wax crust forms small stalagmites. Shadows leap along the beams above, dancing on thin mould, like saints on punishment duty. Somewhere overhead, a pigeon shuffles, cooing sleepily. You envy its delusion that skies still exist beyond all this drizzle. By the time you secure the last knot, the book glows faintly from within, like seawater catching moonlight. You wipe your hands, exhale shakily. Well, you say almost cheerfully, that's craftsmanship for you. No refunds. You set the volume aside to dry. Immediately, a drop of condensation forms on its cover and slides down, not from above, but emerging from the surface itself, pooling at the spine. Another follows. Soon a rivulet trickles down the table edge. Enough. You grab a cloth, press it against the stream. The fabric darkens, warm. You pull back and realize it's tinged red. Not water after all. Your stomach flips. You glance to the door. You're ready to bolt when the sound of footsteps catches your ear, approaching, echoing off the flooded stones outside. The latch turns. It's the master, of course. Who else would barge in, uninvited, into a nightmare and demand productivity reports? He steps in, drenched as if he'd been baptized by the Adriatic itself. Still working? He grunts, eyeing the mess. You nod, mouth dry. He sniffs. Smells like spoiled fish. Fine. Finish before sunrise. The client's man returns at daybreak. His gaze lingers on the book. For a second, something like recognition flickers, quickly suppressed by exhaustion and greed. Careful with that one. They pay double for discretion. Who are they? He shrugs, pulling his coat tighter. Does it matter? Our job's to bind, not to believe. He leaves again, slamming the door, which feels merciful. You sit down hard, heartbeat loud enough to shame the rain. Not to believe, perhaps the most Venetian creed. Yet here you are binding disbelief into leather and thread. A tremor runs through the floorboards, subtle at first, then steady. You assume it's a boat bumping the quay below. Then the brass rivets in your tools begin to hum. The manuscript vibrates under your palm. You could let go, but you don't. Of course you don't. Curiosity again, the noblest method of self-destruction. Slowly, letters raise themselves from the page, tiny embossed worms forming new words in real time. You can't resist reading. The tide remembers its makers. You laugh, too loudly, too tired, and answer, good for it. The letters sink back. Silence stretches until even the rain seems to pause. You rest your head on your forearm. Just a moment of rest, you think. The book's warmth seeps into your skin, oddly soothing, like the hum of distant machinery you don't yet know has been invented. When you blink again, it's because something wet tickles your wrist. The rivulets are returning, tracing along the tabletop, gathering toward the floor. They carry specks that gleam, salt crystals forming tiny constellations. You follow them with your gaze and find that they pattern the floorboards into the same sigils from the page. You whisper, "All right, message received," and step back. Only your boots splash. The water, or whatever fraction of it remains, has risen half an inch. Through the window, you can see the canal lapping higher than usual, pressing against the glass like an inquisitive spirit. Venice floods often enough that panic feels gauche. You tell yourself it's nothing unusual, pull your tools clear of the rising wet. Except the water inside the workshop gleams silver, unlike the outside sludge. It swirls, purposeful, recentering around the pedestal where the finished book sits. You should run. However, professional pride is a toxic glue, consistent, unbreakable, always ready to ruin the artisan. You edge closer, eyes stinging from the odd brightness. Beneath the surface of the water, figures flicker, reflections of spires, bridges, unfamiliar stars. The book hums again. Somewhere beyond the walls, a cock crows prematurely. Dawn isn't due yet, but the sound jerks you upright. For an instant, you believe daylight will sort everything out, that gently, politely, reality will resume normal customer hours. And perhaps it will, because as abruptly as it started, the glow dims. The water collapses into plain puddles. The candlelight reasserts its domestic tyranny. The manuscript lies closed and harmless on the table. You release a breath that tastes of glue and panic. Everything looks ordinary again, though you know better than to trust appearances in this city built on mirrors. There's work yet to finish. Nameplate stamping, sizing, drying. You force yourself into motion. Each task becomes a small mechanical penance. When you finally straighten, dawn really is close now. A weak silver light filters through the coloured panes, turning the damp air to diluted wine. The rain is easing. You feel exhausted, hollow, and slightly ashamed of your own fear. Probably it was just fatigue. Too much glue vapor, too many legends fed to apprentices to keep them from stealing scraps. You smile grimly. Myth versus reality, right? Perhaps they're synonyms here. Still, as you pack away your tools, you hesitate before touching the closed volume. The surface is cool again, unremarkable. You run a fingertip across the spine and watch, with dull acceptance, as a faint trace of your reflection swims along the leather. Just the shimmer of wax light on polish. Nothing more. Outside, footsteps squelch. The returning merchant, perhaps. You're almost relieved. It'll be good to unload this responsibility, this question shaped like a book. Let someone else hallucinate for a change. You lift the delivery cloth, wrap the volume neatly, tie the knots exactly as you found them. Professional symmetry. The illusion of control. The rain starts up again, fainter now, tapping rhythmically on the panes. Just as you reach for your coat, the candle nearest the door flares one last time, then goes out. The wick releases a thread of smoke that curls upward and sketches briefly the shape of that trident before fading. You laugh under your breath, nervous, defiant. Fine. You tell the empty room, if the sea wants its bedtime stories back, it can send proper paperwork. The reflection on the window chuckles a heartbeat later. You would almost call it an echo if it didn't add, in your own voice, it already did. You freeze, hand on the latch, and realize maybe you don't remember opening your mouth at all. But the candlelight's gone, and with it, the comfort of inspecting reflections. Beyond the window the canal gleams, silent, waiting, pretending to be still. And in that stubborn silence you do what any rational apprentice of the 16th century would. Pretend nothing happened. You adjust your hat, open the door to the thinning rain, and step out into Venice's narrow throat of morning. Behind you the workshop breathes once, wood shifting, air settling. The wrapped parcel sits untouched on the table, or so you'd swear if anyone asked later. And when you glance back through the half-closed door, you see only the heat from the coals painting faint movements on the wall, like light reflected off rippling water. Ordinary, innocent, forgettable. You almost believe it. But the sound under your boots is not the soft lap of rain, but the quiet turn of pages from somewhere below, steady as tide. A sound that promises, very reasonably, that the city remembers all who ever tried to bind it. You don't look back again. You just walk, counting steps until the rhythm blends with the shifting hush of the lagoon, Venice whispering its same old comfort. Everything here is sinking, but not fast enough to stop the trade. Myth versus reality. They say Renaissance Venice was all marble light and measured beauty, a floating republic of silken theology, perpetually basking in its own reflection, like that classmate who keeps telling everyone she's so blessed. Reality, however, doesn't shimmer. It leaks. It smells of wet rope, old ink, rotting fish guts, and overambitious civic propaganda. You learn that very quickly in 1520, which sounds like peak Renaissance, until you remember that Renaissance is basically the same marketing term as rebranding failure, with some frescoes. You are the apprentice, or possibly just the poor soul sheltering from the drizzle, inside a bookbinder's shop that pretends to possess gravitas. Pretends, because what can really be dignified under this constant mildew, where the beeswax candles sweat waxy tears and the damp walls inhale more deeply than the lungs of the living? You notice how the light crawls, not shines. It drags itself along spines of stacked ledgers, over boards warped by time and bad commerce. You could almost pity it. Outside, the rain hisses against coloured glass, little mosaic panes that were once part of someone's fervent idea of eternity. Now they just keep condensation hostage, like slow tears that forgot their purpose. The canal beyond is restless, slapping against its moss-black stones, whispering in that distinct Venetian dialect of envy and fatigue. You imagine the boats swaying in that infinite rhythm, gondoliers muttering complaints about republic taxes, about grain prices, about how heaven could have at least installed drainage. The shop itself behaves like an organism whose heart rhythm is off. The press creaks each time the master tightens the bindings. Parchment breathes sharply when cut. You catch yourself timing these sounds, wondering which is louder, manufactured craftsmanship or slowly decaying flesh. Every smell tells its own little lie. The honeyed sweetness of candle smoke promising comfort, the tannic sharpness of glue pretending to be purpose, your own human sweat pretending to be belonging. This is Venice's finest illusion. People think it floats clean above its water, like a saint's idea, hovering above sin. Yet you know that every beam beneath the marble lacework is soaked through with centuries of river rot. The Republic just calls it stability. If the Doge's palazzo had a motto, it would be something like persistently damp, heroically ornate. Your master, let's call him Giovanni because half the city answers to Giovanni, mumbles medieval Latin spells at pages as if grammar itself were exorcism. He's a man worn thin by both prayer and bookkeeping. He murmurs about orders to rebind trade edicts, merchant contracts, condot of military hire, the kind of paper that keeps a republic humming while pretending morality isn't optional. His fingers are covered with gold leaf residue, which sounds romantic until you realize it's basically expensive dandruff. He says binding is sacred. You suspect that's just shorthand for please don't ask how much tendon glue I'm inhaling. The glue pot bubbles like something alive. It's boiled from rabbit skin, they tell you, which means the shop is haunted by the ghosts of 1,000 bunnies sacrificed for literacy. You imagine one of them knocking on the pane, whispering in lagomorphic wrath, all this just for account books? Maybe that's what the tapping at the window is anyway, an ancient rabbit envoy sent to discuss reparation. Storm or ghost, you can't tell. The rain distorts everything. Every time Giovanni lifts a page, the candle's flame trembles, shadow jumping across the uneven walls. Those walls are pasted with test sheets, odd scraps of scripture, half-illuminated psalms with flaked ultramarine. You see cherub faces turned mould green, the blue having surrendered to the particular chemistry of Venetian moisture. Cherubs should be happy. These look unemployed. You peer down at the binding table, calfskin cover, iron clamps, the faint red cross pattern used to measure fold lines. The skin feels warm, though long dead. You think about all the hides of real animals and metaphorical ones. Every merchant ship bringing in goods that used to breathe. Spice from the east, and the east itself recounts the bodies lost fetching it. The city writes trade routes like confessionals. The paper you stitched tonight could document some nobleman's argument over cinnamon tariffs or death at sea claimed as acceptable expense. You bind witness, not wisdom. Giovanni doesn't discuss morality. He discusses texture. Whether this vellum came from a summer-born calf, or whether last week's delivery was trimmed from one too frightened. Fear, apparently, yields better pliancy. You wonder, absurdly, if fear makes humans easier to fold too. He catches you, pausing, and mutters that apprentices who romanticize materials tend to ruin them. You nod, the polite expression meaning, you're probably right, but God help you when the invoices arrive. The candle gutters. Outside, somewhere down the canal, a single church bell coughs out midnight. Not tolls, coughs. Venice bells always sound consumptive, as if each ring scrapes the lungs of plague centuries. Giovanni moves toward the press again, adjusting plates with the precision of someone who trusts mechanical repetition more than prayer. You watch the edges of the ledger curl as iron clamps bite, forcing memory into squared obedience. Sometimes you wonder if the binding craft developed here because Venetians fear evaporation. The city is always dissolving. Power, foundation, reason, morality, everything. So it tries to bind things. Pages, laws, souls. The irony is dense enough to curl your hair. You glance at the window. Rain streaks form intersecting veins, sketched like some celestial cartography. Each droplet radiates dull amber from the candle behind you. For a moment, the glass looks organic, breathing, pulse-laced. You blink away the illusion. Venice always offers illusions like free wine. You sip one, suddenly you're seeing angels pumping bilge water. Giovanni begins humming a fragment of some Gregorian tune, mostly swallowed by glue smoke. It's a comfort imitation, not real harmony. You try to join, but half the notes drown in coughs. He laughs without mirth, says young lungs adapt faster. That's cute optimism. You've been here 3 weeks, and your chest already feels lined with parchment. Sometimes at night you cough and imagine small flakes of scriptorium dust emerging from your throat, stamped with invisible letters begging for revision. A knock at the door interrupts the hum, dull, uncertain. You both freeze because knocks after midnight are never prospective customers. They're confessions, or debt collectors, or ghosts misinterpreting schedules. Giovanni wipes his hands, mutters, opens the door a cautious crack. You glimpse through, outline of a hood, rain streaming over coarse fabric, candlelight reflecting off something metallic beneath the cloak. A handle? A clasp? Impossible to identify before Giovanni ushers the figure in. The shop shrinks further. Air thickens with unbearable expectation. Like that moment before a bad argument, when silence measures itself. The visitor doesn't speak first, just lays a wrapped bundle on the bench. You see damp threads holding coarse wool together. Giovanni leans close, nods, unwraps. Inside, an old folio, water-warped, sealed with red wax, almost melted to transparency. The outer edge carries an insignia, the Lion of St. Mark, half faded, half smirking. You notice Giovanni's hands tremble. Not fear exactly, but the kind of tremor reserved for tax paperwork. He says something like, "For restoration," but the cloaked one only says, "Make it forget." That's how you know you're not dealing with civic archivists. Real archivists only ask you to remember. "Make it forget," Giovanni repeats, slow, as if chewing foreign grammar. The visitor nods, pays in advance with 2 ducats that gleam too brightly for their tarnished age, then leaves. No name, no farewell, just the distinct smell of travel, salt and wax and faint ashes. You look at the folio. Giovanni warns you not to read its contents. Naturally, that sentence alone guarantees you will. As Giovanni disappears into his office, probably to argue with conscience, you open the bundle further. The pages cling together like wet wings. You can't, at first, separate them. Then a sliver frees, and what you glimpse is not script, but painting. Incomplete miniature, in lapis and vermilion. A map, but not of seas or trade, something anatomical, with lines branching like veins across a coastline that could be human flesh. Labels in archaic Greek mutter about channels and memory reservoirs. One phrase recur, Flumen memoriae Venetae, the river of Venetian memory. You laugh softly at the melodrama. It sounds like a pretentious mosaic student's metaphor. Still, you feel a cold humidity deepening around the edges of the folio, like it's breathing through the ink. Trying to lift another page, you hear faint scratching underneath. Not rodent. Venetian rats prefer louder entrances, but paper shifting as if alive. You imagine thousands of past entries. Laws, decrees, banned texts, all aching to shuffle positions before you fix them permanently. The folio's wax seal seems half sentient, trying to reseal itself with every drop of your candle wax splashing near it. You should stop. You don't. Giovanni returns, sees the folio exposed, sighs the universal elder sigh of "I told you so." He says softly that books commissioned to forget are never meant to be read. We'll press away the words. He tells you, flatten the ink, make it sleep. You consider that process, writing anesthetized sentences, suffocated under pressure and paste, memory undone by craftsmanship, delivered to official silence. In a city built of secrets disguised as trade decorum, you realize you are just another worker in its censorship machine. Better if it sleeps, Giovanni adds, than if someone learns how the city floats. He resumes his work instead. The iron plates lower. The folio disappears under mechanical crusade. Sweat runs down your temple unnoticed. The candle flame stutters, momentarily doubling shadows so that you can't tell which is Giovanni's and which belongs to the manuscript itself. Hours pass unnoticed, rain evolving from gentle confession to full interrogation against the glass. You keep pressing, smoothing, aligning. At some point you notice patterns, the shape of the folio's resistance, edges curling in almost human ways. It seems to push back at binding, not dramatically but pointedly, enough to shiver through your hands. You whisper a half-formed joke. Maybe books dislike Venice's humidity too, but Giovanni doesn't laugh. He tells you to step away, says this folio holds state organs. You pretend to misunderstand, but slowly realize he means it literally. Drawn diagrams of bodies, yes, but also actual fragments mixed into pulp. Locks of hair, traces of wax blood pigment that might not be pigment. Venetians have long blurred craft and ritual. Binding was once part of funerary rites for text, developed from mosaic embalming traditions. The myth claims they preserved truth. Reality, they used whatever material decomposed prettily. Gold, lead, skin, memory, all equal under liquidity. You're halfway through pressing when the candle dies out, with that particular wax sigh meaning, "Good luck, mortals." Darkness is gentler than light. It hides moral context. You fumble for flint, ignite another stub. Its flame stares at you accusingly, reflected on the metal clamps like a half-open eye. You realize the folio's texture has changed. Smoother, slick like flesh after rain. The red wax insignia looks darker now, almost fresh. Giovanni remarks, too quietly, that Venice didn't become rich on salt alone. It trafficked memory. People sold stories, same way they sold spices. The folio, he mutters, could be one of those forgotten deals. You ask what happens when memory becomes export product. He shrugs. Eventually someone eats it. That's the Renaissance you live in. Everyone turning recollection into consumable luxury. You'd laugh if it weren't so damp. You already suspect half of Venetian aroma comes from decomposing nostalgia. City too proud to admit rot, so it markets it as perfume. A scent called persistence. Giovanni sends you home, or wherever you pretend to lodge, before dawn. He locks the folio inside the press, instructs you to return at noon. Your hands smell of glue and something metallic that refuses to wash off. Stepping outside, the alley performs its submerged symphony. Drip, shuffle, canal echo. Dark archways lean in like spectators. The water's surface reflects lamplight and trembling fractures. Looks serene until you spot floating detritus. Dead gull feathers, fruit peel, broken rosary beads. Venice's daily offering. The rain has softened, but the air shivers with stale thunder like unresolved guilt. You walk, half lost, past shops shuttered with damp ambition. Somewhere down a side canal, laughter emerges. Young, innocent, forgettable. You almost believe it, but the sound under your boots is not the soft lap of rain, but the quiet turn of pages from somewhere below, steady as tide. A sound that promises very reasonably that the city remembers all who ever tried to bind it. You don't look back again. You just walk, counting steps until the rhythm blends with the shifting hush of the lagoon. Venice, whispering its same old comfort. Everything here is sinking, but not fast enough to stop the trade. Myth versus reality. People say the Renaissance was a clean rebirth, a golden glow of art and genius floating over the glittering surface of Venice. They forget the mildew, the price of candles, and how many painters used real bone dust in their whites. If genius smells like mould and boiled glue, you are definitely living at its source. Tonight the myth sweats, and you are the one mopping it up. You are, technically, an apprentice, or, depending on how you like to introduce yourself, a guest of the trade. There's a difference, only on paper, and half of those papers are stained with lamp oil. The master of the bindery, Signor Orlando, tells customers that his workshop is blessed by the Virgin. You've seen the Virgin. She's a cracked wooden carving with one eye missing, propped near the press to dry out the damp. Her miracles involve chasing silverfish off the bindings. You learned early that bookbinding smells nothing like knowledge. It smells like dead animals, because that's what the glue is. boiled until it acquires a fume that gently blisters your soul. You also learn that in Venice, every smell has a twin outside on the canal. Fish rotting, algae fermenting, the slow soak of centuries of trade in one long tepid bath. You wonder if the city and the workshop share a nervous system. If you hammer a nail into the spine of a folio, maybe a ripple passes through the lagoon. Behind you, the rain works hard on the coloured glass. The sound isn't cheerful. It's an accountant's patience, each drop insisting on being tallied. The candlelight does trapeze tricks on the brass tools, flattening them, then making them leap alive. Orlando grumbles in his corner about an overdue commission from a patrician family who barely reads, but demands gilt lettering big enough to prove literacy. You half listen, half drift. Outside, a gondola rocks, a gentle drunken gesture. Around you the myths of Venice crumble one by one, like too dry parchment. The myth of beauty, a painter's conceit, born in studios where apprentices like you ground mineral pigments until their arms failed. The myth of order, a senator's bedtime story, because real order here is the rhythm of rot. And the myth of progress, you've seen printing presses biting into the domain of the binder, those patient lettersmiths flooding the market with cheap reproducibility. Everyone whispers that script is dying. You wonder what else will follow. A pillow of glue bubbles on the iron stove. You watch it, hypnotized by the minor violence of boiling adhesive. There's a superstition among binders: never look too long into the pot, or you'll see your own face bound shut. But tonight, everyone's faces are already half sealed by heat and fatigue. Orlando snores in his chair, his breath tuned to the rain. You're supposed to be finishing the second layer of thread on a commission, a Greek text of herbal remedies, but the words crawl across the page in a language you don't understand. They form patterns instead of meaning. You trace them with a gloved finger, as if texture alone could teach pronunciation. You remember the merchant who brought the book, a small man with a large fear. He called it a curiosity, a thing found across the sea, meaning anywhere east of Crete. He said it needed rebinding because the leather was splitting, but his eyes avoided yours when he explained the sudden stains on the margins. Oil, he said quickly. You recognized no oil that dries like rust. When he left, Orlando joked about merchants and their secrets, about ink being thicker than blood, about how knowledge travels faster when it smells foreign. You laughed then. You laugh less now, because tonight the stains have spread. Pages that were once stiff are soft. The text curls toward itself, hungry. You tell yourself it's moisture, the same kind that slicks your sleeves, but once you've believed one myth, what's another? You press the pages under a board weighted with a spare marble bust. Aristotle, ironically decapitated during the capture of some monastery. The philosopher looks unimpressed as you work. So does his nose. From the corner, the candle sighs. Wax drools down its side like guilt. You've been meaning to trim the wick, but the shadows dancing around the pot stove are predictable, comforting. Less comforting is the sound under your boots, the wavering drip of water through the cracks in the floorboards, leading somewhere below the shop. Venice, as always, keeps a basement confession booth in every house, the hidden cell where damp things go to mutter. You think of the lower room, where unused parchment is stacked beside crates of copper type, where the glue fumes thicken into a hollow sweetness. Orlando keeps it locked, but the key hangs in his coat, and right now the coat slumps on the chair beside him. You imagine the feel of that key, cool against the skin, shaped for invitation. Curiosity is the apprentice's curse, disguised as virtue. It makes you good at your craft, and bad at survival. So you take the key. There's a moment when morality might still talk you out of it, but morality went to bed after the first drop of midnight. You step past the stove, careful not to wake its temper, and descend the wooden stairs that creak like offended ancestors. The air grows colder, but less physical somehow, as if the damp here isn't merely wet but attentive. The basement greets you with reflection. Not mirror reflection, but water, a thin film of lagoon insinuating itself through cracks, turning the floor into a shallow map of shining veins. On the far wall, shelves, On the shelves, books that never made it back upstairs. Some without covers, some with spines burst open like roasted fruit. You try to ignore the soft ticking, maybe dripping, maybe something else. You lift your candle, squinting. The first shelf bears volumes you know, ledgers, prayer manuals, a Venetian edition of Virgil with most of his lines misprinted into near-bawdy jokes. The second shelf carries stranger guests, bindings with nothing written on them, their leather unmarked, yet faintly warm to the touch. When you brush a finger along one, the warmth pulses back. You set it down quickly, reconsidering the definition of book. There's a scraping from beneath the shelves. Not an animal. The rhythm's too deliberate, like the sound of paper stiffening, drawing breath. You tell yourself any city built on water will echo strangely. You tell yourself the glue fumes breed hallucinations. You are almost persuasive. On the work table near the wall sits the Greek Curiosity. You left it upstairs, but apparently it disagrees with geography. Its cover lies open, as if caught mid-sentence. The candlelight crawls across its script, shining off letters that were, an hour ago, flat black. Now they glint like they remember the sea. You should probably close the book. That thought flits by, then evaporates, replaced by the much dumber urge to read another line. The ink gleams in a slow rhythm, sinking deeper whenever you blink. You recognize a single word repeated, mu lis alpha, B, your one recognizable Greek term from an older copy of Aristotle. Appropriate, you think, something restless, always returning to the hive, always producing golden curses. Behind you, somewhere above, Orlando coughs, a normal sound that startles you all the same. You nearly drop the candle. Its flame flails, regains dignity. You realize there's another light down here, a fainter glow seeping through the floorboards from below even this basement. That shouldn't be possible. The canal should be directly under, full of black water and disappointed fishermen. Yet the glow stays where it is, warm, pulsing, like another candle, or a small forge, or maybe, because Venice always prefers metaphors leaking into physics, a shrine. You crouch, find a hatch half hidden under a pile of discarded scraps. The wood around it swells, resisting. Eventually it yields with a sigh, exhaling a scent that is not strictly unpleasant, but alarmingly intimate. Salt, metal, parchment softened by breath. You should absolutely not climb down. You do. The passage is narrow, carved from the bones of old pilings, lined with the sort of humidity that thinks of itself as a personality. Your candle barely survives the descent, flickering like a guilty thought. When your boots touch the bottom, they do not hit water, but a slick surface that looks solid only out of politeness. The glow emanates from further ahead, behind a curvature of planks walked into an accidental archway. You duck under, and find another room, if room can describe a cavity where walls are made of stacked books, swollen to twice their size, their pages sealed by time into something more like muscle than paper. The air vibrates faintly, a whispering chorus at the edge of intelligibility. You catch fragments in a dozen languages, Latin scratches, Greek licks, something Slavic coughs. The glow issues from the center. A wide basin filled not with water or ink, but with glue, boiling without fire, calm yet restless, its surface flexing like a lung. Floating in it are scraps of parchment, drifting together and apart, rearranging into fragments of words before sinking again. You watch, knowing you shouldn't. A voice, maybe your own, says softly, binding. You kneel, drawn by the dull fascination of manual labour, even when it's metaphysical. Across the glue's surface moves a pattern, ink outlining the map of Venice itself, canals curling, bridges gleaming wetly, streets named and unnamed. For a moment you think you understand. This is how knowledge adheres, not by preservation, but by fusion. The city binds itself nightly, pressing every memory, rumour, and sin into fresh pages, while the water cools its fever. The myth of Venice is eternal. It's just good bookkeeping. But myths have maintenance requirements. The basin stirs, one scrap of parchment rises and clings to your sleeve. You twitch too late. The glue burns through the cloth, kissing the skin beneath with recognition. On it, letters appear. Not Greek this time, but vernacular Italian. Your Italian, looping as if written from the inside out. You read them. The name of your master, the date of your apprenticeship, even the street. Someone already recorded your biography here. You're an entry in an account that writes itself. You whisper something unhelpful like, "No, the glue doesn't care. It keeps breathing." You back away, colliding with a shelf of engorged manuscripts. A few tumble, hitting the floor with wet sighs. One opens, its pages slick. From within slips not text, but a flutter of feathers. Tiny, black, ink-soaked feathers that dissolve before they land. The smell of honey rises strangely. You think of bees again, of the Greek word etched into that book above. The air itself starts humming, as if somewhere far up in the workshop, a swarm begins to remember its queen. You don't think, you run. Stairs can be poetic when they decide to collapse. These don't, but they complain with a long sequence of groans that will later score your nightmares. You slam the hatch behind you, half expecting it to pulse open again, but the wood merely shudders, sealing in its own story. Back in the basement, the water on the floor now reaches your ankles, warmer than before. You wade to the stairs, every step louder than thunder inside your ribs. As you climb, you hear a faint buzzing under the drip of rain, the sort that could be insects, or air trapped in glue, or words disassembling themselves. Upstairs, the workshop waits. The candle beside Aristotle has nearly died, the wax forming a miniature geography of ruin. Orlando still snores. Unbothered, you stare at him, wondering if that's sleep or the professional version of denial. On the table, the Greek volume sits exactly where you left it earlier, before all reason went downstairs. Its pages are closed now, clean, too clean. You approach, half certain the book will leap up, half wishing it would so the decision could be easier. It stays inert. You lift it. The cover feels heavier, as if it has absorbed something. When you tilt it, a thread of golden residue slides down the spine. You wipe it on your apron. The smell of honey again, faint but unmistakable. Attic bees, you mutter, channeling Orlando's habit of explaining nonsense through misplaced natural history. You almost laugh. Almost. The rain thickens outside, turning the glass into a moving blur of stained darkness. You set the book aside and reach for the kettle, because sometimes boiling water is heroic enough. The noise comforts you. It's ordinary noise. If you pretend hard, the world recalibrates. Morning, meaning a lighter shade of grey, arrives with the city ringing its endless toll of bells. Their echoes crawl through the alleys before filtering into the workshop, scattering the night's secrets like loose type. Orlando wakes mid-snort, curses gently, and orders you to fetch new thread from the chest. You nod, trying not to shake. The Greek book has vanished. You check twice, then thrice, even search under the pile of leather scraps. Orlando merely glares over his spectacles, muttering about apprentices losing customers' property. You attempt a rational explanation, a new method, the tide, maybe rats with literary curiosity. But he cuts you off. It will reappear, he says. Things always wash back here. It sounds more like prophecy than consolation. You fetch the thread. The day passes under its usual monotone of scraping knives and sighing presses. You watch customers drift in, a friar selling indulgences to finance his next sin, a clerk who insists on calfskin because goatskin makes him sneeze, an artist wanting blank folios for sketching angels that look tired. You copy their names into the ledger, hands steady out of habit. By afternoon the glue pot boils again, same temperature as before, same innocence. The only difference is the faint reflection on its surface. The outline of your face, yes, but not exactly yours. The eyes are printed characters, the mouth stitched. You blink. Reflection normalizes. Good. Exhaustion is a solvent for superstition. You focus on the task, trimming an edge, pressing a spine. Orlando tells a story about a rival workshop accused of binding forbidden pamphlets, the kind that suggests the Pope collects art for more worldly reasons. He laughs, says nothing lasts in this lagoon except scandals and salt. You match his laugh beat for beat. By evening, the rain returns. Venice is consistent like that. It prefers to launder its sins nightly, even if they dry the same colour. You step outside to close the shutters. The canal breathes against the stones, oily and indifferent. Farther along the street, a procession of masked doctors passes. Their beaked faces grotesque in the windy mist. You hadn't heard of any outbreak, but this city invents crises for sport. You retreat inside, where the candle reawakens its small tyranny over darkness. Orlando dismisses you before midnight. You thank him, half respectful, half relieved. He waves a hand heavy with ring stains, mumbling about counting inventory. As you leave, you catch sight of the ledger on his desk, neat columns alternating between debts and deliveries. Yet one line near the bottom glows faintly, not bright, just a subtle warmth that your eyes won't ignore. You angle your head, pretending to squint at dust. The entry under acquisition reads your name. The corresponding note under binding is blank. Outside, the rain has grown temperamental. You pull your cloak tight and step into the alley. The smell of glue never really leaves you. It threads itself between raindrops. The canal murmurs, a soaked confessional. You think of the myth that Venice floats by miracle, a city held up by faith alone. Reality is duller. It's held up by wood so old it believes in miracles out of habit. Every few decades the piles are replaced, and the city forgets which timbers were first. That's Venice's true art, replacing decay fast enough to call it continuity. You walk, counting steps over the slick cobbles, until the rhythm aligns with the rain and your own pulse. The alleys breathe, swallowing the evening. A boat glides past, a shadow with a heartbeat. You almost believe in peace again, until you feel a weight in your satchel you swear is empty. You open it. There, under your tools, sits the Greek book, perfectly dry. You could throw it into the canal. You could. The myth says the sea accepts all offerings. The reality, the sea remembers debts, so you walk faster instead, pretending ignorance can be a form of strength. Behind you, in some unreachable layer beneath the workshop, a faint buzz answers. You don't hear it, or rather, you pretend not to. Somewhere, another apprentice starts his shift. Another book opens its softened spine. Another drop of glue hits the pot, marrying skin to story. Venice keeps binding itself page by living page, and above, the city's light flickers through the fog, a golden manuscript, written on water, always being rewritten, always almost beautiful. Myth versus reality. People like to recycle the phrase, Venice in the Renaissance was a jewel of the seas, as if the whole place were dipped in powdered gold and serenaded nightly by clean-shaven tenors. The reality? The city was a damp, mildewed scrapbook, gilded only at the edges, with half the pages stuck together from floodwater and the other half gnawed by rats. Romance sells postcards. Dysentery doesn't. You can't sell the stink of wet hemp rope or the smell of the canals after a week of rain, but they were there, braided into daily life, just as tightly as the lacework bridges. The jewel feels less like a diamond and more like a molar left too long in the mouth of an old drunkard. You are standing in the workshop, in that hour when the flame in the beeswax candle gives up pretending it's strong, sagging sideways into its own smell. Outside, the rain has lost patience and simply hammers down in dull percussion on the coloured panes, each drop turning a fragment of the world outside into warped, stained glass. The thin wooden walls exhale the scent of old glue and leather, mixed, uninvited, with something sharp from the canal, rotting eel perhaps, or an oozing bundle of discarded rope swelling in the tide. People think bookbinding is a quiet trade. They imagine delicate hands and air perfumed with leather, not the chronic fugue of human sweat and gelatin, nor the cough lodged permanently in an apprentice's chest from breathing lime dust and hide scrapings. Your master is hunched over the press, the great screw vertical as the mast of a galley. He wears the same wool cap every day, the brim stained with more years than you've been alive. It isn't romantic. There's no halo of genius here, just the sharp hiss of his lungs and the irritated creak of old wood. You pass him a length of thread, waxed to keep it from fraying, and in the near dark it shines like a wet hair from some enormous beast. In your other hand is the needle, too large and too blunt for embroidery, exactly the right size for punching through signatures of paper with minimal collateral damage. Myth says Venetian books were works of sublime artistry. Reality says a lot of them were knocked together by tired hands under bad light so they could be sold before the river of mercantile goods shifted elsewhere. The hours leak by in an oiled drip. The candle gutters every time the wind gnaws at the shutters. The rain outside is patient, chewing slowly through whatever illusions visitors arrive with. Tourists don't exist yet. The people who come here do so to buy, to negotiate, to spy, or to vanish. Maybe you're here for the last reason. Maybe not. The air inside feels like an overbound book, covers pressing in, spine ready to crack. That's when you notice the small, almost polite sound from somewhere beneath the floor, not the usual rat scratch or creak from the beams. This has rhythm to it, a faint, persistent buzz. Behind you, in some unreachable layer beneath the workshop, a faint buzz answers. You don't hear it, or rather, you pretend not to. Somewhere, another apprentice starts his shift, another book opens its softened spine, another drop of glue hits the pot, marrying skin to story. Venice keeps binding itself, page by living page. And above, the city's light flickers through the fog, a golden manuscript written on water, always being rewritten, always almost beautiful. It would be pleasant to stop there, wouldn't it? To let the metaphor do the heavy lifting, send you out into the rain with some pocket-sized epiphany about beauty and decay holding hands. But myths grow in precisely that kind of romantic compost. So here comes the reality. Beauty and decay don't hold hands here. They gnash teeth at each other across the same cramped alley. And if you stand too near, one of them will spit on your boots. You push the shutters open a fraction, if only to trick your lungs into thinking they've discovered fresh air. The canal below is a smear of grey-green muscle in the dark, the kind that flexes to slap the hull of a moored gondola. Its tall iron prow looks like a battered eyebrow over a tired face. Somewhere, footsteps cross a bridge and vanish. The bridges here are experts in erasing people. You know, in the sarcastic way you know most things, that whatever merchant or nameless nightwalker just crossed, they're probably composing their own myth of Venice right now, something they'll trade later as conversation currency, omitting the part where their boots sucked half the street filth into the lobby of their rented room. The glue in the pot has reached that perfect, ominous stage where it coats everything, setting in thin, invisible skins that will crack at the wrong touch. You pull a stack of pages toward you, the rag paper heavy but limp after the damp weeks, edges feathering into fluff. You stitch them into their gatherings, the needle biting through with small size of paper fibres giving way. All the while, that low buzz below is growing. Or maybe you've just stopped pretending to ignore it. You tell yourself it's water moving in some forgotten conduit. Venice is full of those, secret capillaries carrying brackish life, and not something alive, something with a pulse that doesn't belong to the city. Your master grunts to indicate it's time for the coverboards. Oak if you're lucky, pasteboard if you aren't. Tonight it's pasteboard, thick layers of waste paper, glued together so yesterday's accounts and last month's bad poetry can die quietly inside your binding. You fit them to the text block, leather waiting like a patient executioner to wrap the whole mess up and call it complete. Myths about the durability of Renaissance craft rarely mention how many corners were cut to meet a deadline before the next shipment docked. This isn't artistry, it's triage for paper. Hours later, though time is stubbornly refusing to exist in measured pieces, you're rubbing the spine down when the buzzing stops. Not fades, stops, like a candle pinched out. The silence that follows is slippery, heavier than the air has any right to be. Your master doesn't notice, either because he's deaf to it, or because he learned too early that noticing certain things costs extra. The rain redoubles its effort, playing the rooftop like a drum with no rhythm section. Outside, something splashes into the canal, too large to be a fish, too clumsy to be a deliberate diver. You wonder briefly, as you work the last edge of leather over pasteboard, whether the city is swallowing something again. A debtor, a spy, a bundle that was screaming before the cloth gag went in. Myth: Venice is a safe harbour. Reality: the water takes what it wants, and the city smiles politely while it happens. By the time the binding is done, your hands smell of tannin, glue, and rain-sour wool from your cuffs. You slide the book toward the stack without admiration. There's no room for it here. Admiration is for patrons who drop in to run a white-gloved finger along the gilded edge and never bother to ask whose hands did the work or how many centuries of winter chill are locked inside that leather. You blow out the candle and the workshop exhales darkness. The walk home, if you can call it home, is a lesson in damp geometry. Streets barely wide enough for your shoulders kink sideways, then abruptly open into squares littered with rainwater and refuse, before narrowing again to embrace you in the odour of wet stone. Here and there, torches under arcades shake and spit like they're protesting their own employment. A pair of watchmen loiter under one, muttering about smuggling routes in the North Lagoon. You hunch past them, faceless under your hood, another sodden bit of night they'll forget in under a breath. Somewhere in the distance, under the smell of smoke and salt, you catch it again. The buzz, fainter, maybe, or maybe it's shifted into the bones of the buildings, travelling along the same routes as the damp and the gossip. You tell yourself you're imagining it. That's free. You don't tell yourself that it might be a warning, because warnings are rarely free, and in Venice you pay for them twice, once when you hear them, and again when it's too late. When you finally squeeze through the warped door into your lodging, the rain has found its way inside ahead of you, drafting under the sill and leaving a dark snail trail along the floorboards. The single chair is where you left it, facing the wall, because no piece of furniture in this city trusts the windows. You sit, dripping, and for reasons you won't examine, take the small book from your satchel. The leather is still tacky, the spine worn from your hands. You picture it 100 years from now, in someone else's hands, in another workshop, its edges possibly nibbled by a different generation of rats, its pages foxed and blurred. Maybe the myth will have grown around it, that it came from a master binder, from an age when things were made to last forever, and the reality will be as simple as the rain outside, a tired apprentice, in a cramped shop, binding pages together, while something in the dark hummed like a trapped insect. The myth-makers will have to do without that part. They always do. Before you lie down, you notice the buzzing is gone again, or has merged so perfectly with the rain that you can't extract one from the other. Your eyelids drop anyway. Somewhere, down in the black-stained tissues of the city, it will start again. Centuries later, when guidebooks purr about the majesty of Renaissance Venice, the illusion will be sold in high-season gloss, noble facades, candlelight dinners, gondoliers in matching stripes. You won't find the smell of weak glue, the taste of rain off rotting beams, the itchy pressure of leather dust on the inside of your wrists. Myth needs clean air to breathe. And if you're tempted to ask whether the city was better then or now, whether the myth has improved on the original, remember this: in both versions, something in the dark is still binding it all together, and you probably don't want to meet it. Somewhere behind the tourist chatter and the scent of overpriced perfume, there's still a faint, persistent buzz. Think of it as the sound of a book being stitched in a room you'll never enter, in a city that doesn't care whether you can tell fact from fiction. After all, the cover is already on, the spine is tight, and the water is rising.